The regime had perfected fear the way other civilizations perfected agriculture or music. It was refined, quantified, stored, and released in carefully calculated doses. Entire star systems ran on it. Lights dimmed at precise wavelengths known to unsettle the nervous system. Corridors curved in ways that disoriented spatial instinct, and even silence was regulated, never absolute, always humming faintly, like a reminder that something larger was listening. Within this architecture of dread, the alien woman moved with practiced stillness. She appeared human at first glance, enough to make visitors relax for half a second too long, but the illusion always broke. Her skin carried a soft opalescent sheen, as if light hesitated before settling on it, and the color shifted subtly. With her emotional state, though she had been trained since childhood to keep it neutral. Her pupils stretched vertically when she focused, and her ears tapered back just enough to mark her as something other. She was an observer, a translator, not of language alone, but of intent, fear responses, compliance probabilities. She existed to watch power work. She had never questioned it. Terror was clarity. Terror simplified decisions. Terror kept civilizations orderly. That was what she had been taught, reinforced by doctrine, data, and demonstration. So when the Empire's most feared enforcer entered the chamber, she felt only the familiar tightening in her chest, the professional readiness to record another successful submission. The enforcer's presence distorted the air itself, a biological field weaponized through evolution and augmentation. Prisoners usually collapsed before words were exchanged. The human did not, bound, bloodied, undeniably fragile by imperial standards. The human looked up and laughed. Not a controlled sound, not hysteria, but a short, sharp burst that seemed to surprise even him. He followed it with a breathless comment about how the enforcer stood like a villain who practiced in a mirror too long. The translator implants lagged, as if unwilling to process something so incorrect. A few guards stiffened. One glanced around, clearly unsure whether this counted as a threat or a malfunction. The alien woman felt her skin flicker despite herself. The enforcer paused. That alone was unprecedented. Fear was supposed to land immediately, crushing humor, sarcasm, thought itself. Instead, the room felt awkward. The human kept going, adding that if he was going to die, he had hoped for less drama and more efficiency. It was absurd. It was stupid. It was deeply, catastrophically funny. Something inside her shifted. Not rebellion, nothing so grand, but a hairline fracture in certainty. She realized she was holding back a laugh, and the effort terrified her more than the enforcer ever had. Fear had failed to arrive on schedule. In its place was confusion, and beneath that, a dangerous, bubbling thought she had never been trained to suppress. If fear could be mocked, even once, what else had they been wrong about? Interrogation cycles blurred into one another, measured not by time, but by data packets and atmospheric recalibrations. The chamber adjusted itself endlessly, fine-tuning gravity, light, temperature, each variable optimized to provoke stress responses, cataloged over millennia. The alien woman stood at her console, recording neural spikes, hormonal surges, microtremors. She knew what terror looked like in numbers. She had memorized its curves the way others memorized constellations. The human refused to draw them. His readings came in crooked, messy, almost insulting. Cortisol rose at odd moments, usually when the machinery whirred dramatically, then dropped again when it should have peaked. His heart rate spiked not during threats, but when the chair's restraints pinched him, prompting a sarcastic complaint about budget cuts. When presented with a holographic projection of his species' hypothetical extinction, he squinted and asked whether the color grading was final or just a draft. Guards shifted uncomfortably. The system flagged anomalies. She flagged them again, hoping repetition might make them make sense. She was required to remain close, to observe without interference. Yet, proximity changed things. She began to anticipate his remarks, a half-second before he spoke, and felt her skin betray her with brief, shimmering pulses she had to disguise by adjusting the room lighting. Her internal bioregulators, normally flawless, issued minor correction alerts when she suppressed laughter. Laughter! The word still felt incorrect in this place, like a foreign particle, introduced into a sealed environment. The human noticed everything. "You do that glow thing when they threaten me," he said casually, as if commenting on weather. She told him it was a calibration artifact. He nodded, far too cheerfully, and replied that he liked it better than the screaming alarms. During one cycle, while an enforcer lectured about inevitability, the human leaned toward her as much as the restraints allowed, and whispered that fear was like bad theater, convincing only if everyone agreed to take it seriously. His explanations spiraled into metaphors involving school bullies, broken elevators, and an animal from his homeworld that fainted when startled. None of it was technically coherent. All of it felt dangerous. She told herself it was nonsense. Fear was structural. Fear was physics. And yet, protocols began to stall around them. Commands had to be repeated. Threat displays escalated too quickly, overshooting their intended effect and creating confusion instead of compliance. The chamber recalibrated itself again and again, chasing a response that refused to stabilize. Watching the data scroll, she felt a quiet, unsettling realization take root. The system wasn't malfunctioning. It was being misunderstood. When the human joked that death had been rescheduled pending administrative approval, she almost laughed aloud. The sound rose in her chest, unfamiliar and warm, and she crushed it down with practiced discipline. Still, her skin shimmered once, unmistakably. For the first time, she wondered if fear truly governed because it was powerful, or simply because no one had ever dared to treat it as ridiculous. The Empire's response was swift, inefficient, and unmistakably afraid of admitting confusion. New directives flooded the station, each more severe than the last, layered atop existing protocols, like armor hastily welded onto a cracking hull. Fear amplifiers were recalibrated to higher thresholds. Visual intimidation assets were upgraded. Silence quotas were enforced with punitive enthusiasm. On paper, everything grew harsher. In practice, it grew clumsy. The first signs appeared in individuals. A guard hesitated before activating a shock field, his finger hovering just long enough to be noticed. An overseer repeated a threat 3 times, each iteration louder, slower, less convincing, as if volume could substitute for authority. Another laughed by accident, just a sharp exhale, then froze in terror at his own mistake. Reports logged these incidents as morale irregularities, a phrase so vague it explained nothing and blamed everyone. The alien woman was summoned without ceremony. No raised voices, no displays, only a private reprimand recorded in her file under empathic drift. The term was clinical, bloodless, and absurdly precise, and she had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling when she read it. Empathy, according to doctrine, was a contamination risk. Drift implied movement, choice. She accepted the warning with proper posture and neutral skin tone, then returned to her duties with something new folded carefully inside her: amusement. She began with trivial deviations. Reports submitted minutes late. Clarification requests phrased with polite curiosity rather than deference. When an enforcer issued a threat, she asked whether it was metaphorical or procedural, and whether there was a preferred sequence for screaming. Once, she claimed not to understand a command until it was explained twice, slowly, which forced the overseer to hear his own words echo back at him, stripped of mystique. Each small act felt like stepping onto thin ice and discovering it didn't crack. The human noticed immediately. He watched her the way one recognizes an accomplice forming in real time, eyes bright despite bruises, grin appearing at the edges of exhaustion. "See?" he said during one monitoring cycle. "Once you make them explain it, it stops being scary and starts being silly." He encouraged her recklessly, suggesting improvements, rating threats on a scale from intimidating to trying too hard. She told him to be quiet. She listened anyway. Together, without planning it, they exposed the Empire's flaw. Terror required consent. It needed the audience to lean forward, to believe. When that participation faltered, power sagged under its own theatrics. Orders stalled in committees debating tone. Executions were delayed pending revised fear projections. Restricted zones reported unauthorized laughter. Short, disbelieving sounds that spread faster than panic ever had. The Empire still loomed vast and brutal, but up close it began to look strained, like a performer sensing the crowd slip away. Watching it all unfold, the alien woman felt something dangerously close to relief. Fear still existed. It always would. But now she knew it could be mocked, stalled, questioned. And once that knowledge took hold, it became impossible to unlearn. By the time the station's alarms softened from constant menace into background irritation, she realized she had already crossed a line that no reprimand could erase. She no longer stood perfectly still while observing. Her posture had loosened, weight shifting naturally from one foot to the other, like a human's might. The opalescent sheen of her skin no longer stayed locked behind discipline. It shimmered openly now, slow waves of color responding to thought rather than fear. And no one quite knew how to order her to stop. When overseers glanced at her, uncertain whether the glow was defiance or malfunction, she met their eyes calmly and waited for them to decide. They rarely did. She still resembled humanity closely enough to unsettle visitors, but now the differences felt intentional instead of shameful. The tapered ears were uncovered, her pupils elongated without apology. Expressions once carefully flattened began to return to her face: curiosity, mild irritation, something dangerously close to warmth. Fear had shaped her reflexes, her education, her very nervous system, and she no longer denied that. But ownership was another matter entirely. Fear, she had learned, was a tool that dulled with use, especially when examined too closely. The human remained confined, his fate caught in an endless loop of reviews and recalculations. No protocol existed for what he had done. He had not resisted, escaped, or incited revolt. He had laughed. He had joked. He had made the empire hesitate, and hesitation was contagious. Some days she thought he would be quietly erased, to restore narrative order. Other days she suspected the system was afraid to finalize his end, wary of what it might look like if even death arrived late and awkward. He seemed unconcerned either way. "I've always hated cliffhangers," he told her once, then added that it was nice to be one. The Empire still stood. Fleets still darkened skies. Enforcers still inspired dread at a distance. Yet up close, things no longer aligned perfectly. Threats required clarification. Punishments sparked paperwork. Fear displays were reviewed for effectiveness instead of assumed infallible. Somewhere in the machinery of domination, ridicule had wedged itself like grit in a gear, not stopping motion outright but grinding it unevenly, audibly. On her last recorded observation cycle, she walked the long corridor outside the interrogation chambers alone. The walls were designed to amplify screams, to carry them beautifully. That day, they carried something else, a faint echo of laughter, long gone but impossible to forget. She paused, skin glowing softly in the dim light, and allowed herself a small smile. The galaxy's most brutal force remained terrifying in theory, overwhelming on paper. In practice, it was learning an uncomfortable truth, that fear demanded belief, and belief could be withdrawn. Somewhere behind reinforced doors, a human joke lingered, harmless and indestructible, rewriting the rules of power without violence, without heroes, without a single shot fired.